Hi and welcome to this week's Wu Wei Wisdom Life Lessons teaching. It's great to be back with you all. This week we are talking all about letting go of the past. Now, as you get older, do you find that you are increasingly ruminating on time that you believe you have wasted in your life, mistakes you think you've made, opportunities missed, or wrongs that still have not been righted? Well, in this teaching, you'll learn how to undo and let go of this rumination so you can finally start living happily in the present without looking back. Okay, David, so this rumination and not wanting to let go of the past, how common is it amongst your clients?
It's very common, Alex, and it's something that it's almost like a kind of a habit that my clients will say, I'm stuck in this habit, this way of thinking. Some clients will even say it's natural, but it's not natural. This is a great example, and perhaps we can unpack this is the inner child. So this is a great example of the inner child. So perhaps before we find how you change it, let's try and understand what the inner child is trying to achieve here.
Okay, so can we go even further back to basics? For our new listeners, what is the inner child?
So the inner child is a label that I give to a part of your mind. You may want to call it your ego, your critical self, that little devil that sits on the corner on your shoulder that's always criticizing you. So I would want to call that the inner child. I believe that label, that name for that part of your mind is far more helpful and allows you to find a resolution to these types of problems. This type of problem of living in the past, always comparing, thinking things should have been better, chastising yourself, going round and round on the carousel of despair. This is definitely the inner child.
But I wonder, David, though, you mentioned the word natural. Isn't it natural as we get older to become aware of our own mortality and reflect on what we've done or haven't done in our life as a kind of natural or positive thing? Well, at what point does it become a negative or inappropriate or unhealthy?
Well, you mix two things up there. Our own mortality, it is natural as we get older to start to consider that and what our views are of death and whatever that entails. But looking back and saying it would have been better. For instance, it would have been better if I didn't make that decision. Well, how do you know that? It could have been worse. It would have been, wouldn't it be better if I hadn't made that mistake? Well, again, how do you know that? It could have been worse. So this is what the inner child part of your mind and I call wishful thinking. The inner child is always wishful thinking, always criticizing, saying, oh, you didn't do this right, or they did something against you. If they hadn't have done this, our life would have been better. Oh my goodness, I hear so often with my clients, if my childhood would have been better, more loving, more supportive, more nourishing, my life would have been so much better, David. Well, how do you know that? Could have been worse. You don't know that. And this is exactly how that part of the mind, the inner child, view on life, worldview is always looking, what's that old saying, the grass is always greener, always looking for something better. Oh, it would be better. Wouldn't it be better if my partner was better? Wouldn't it be better if I was in a better job? Wouldn't it be better if we lived somewhere better? And it's always looking on this constant treadmill of criticizing, comparing and being judgmental. This is what we call CCJ. This is very important. Criticizing, comparing, being judgmental. If you do that about yourself or about other people, CCJ, this is your inner child. So many clients say to me, I've watched your video, but I don't recognize my inner child. This is your inner child. If you're comparing, criticizing, being judgmental, this is your inner child. Because the inner child part of your mind is never happy. It will never be content. The inner child, and this is why I like the name of it, wants what it wants, It wants it now. It wants it in the way it wants it. It wants everybody to give what it wants. It wants to be rescued. It wants to be taken care of. This is the voice of the inner child.
And I guess, David, so not only do we fail to acknowledge the fact that, hindsight is a wonderful thing. It's very easy to reflect back and say, well, if only I'd said this, or if only I'd made that decision, if only I hadn't done that. Well, not only is hindsight a wonderful thing, and we've often failed to register that, but layered on top of it is what you've just been talking about, is this inner child perfectionism, inner child fantasy thinking, that it's very easy for that part of our ego, our mind, our inner child to pick upon what should have been a perfect outcome and assume that would have happened if we hadn't done, or if they hadn't done it, or if I'd have done this differently. And I guess naturally, as we do get older, we've got more of a catalogue of years of decisions, of choices, of actions, of inactions for the inner child to pore over and ruminate over. It's like it's perfection for the inner child, because it's got so much to pick at and judge you and criticize you about, because you've been on the earth for longer.
Well, that's a great example you've used at the beginning of what you're saying. With hindsight, think about that word. My clients say this to me all the time. With hindsight, David, wouldn't it have been better if I'd have made a different decision? I'm sorry, you haven't got hindsight, because you don't know the outcome of a different decision.
Exactly.
The different decision could have been even worse. It could have been the worst thing you could have done. So you haven't got hindsight. And then, exactly as you said, all of these build up a kind of a library or a buffet where the inner child can go and gorge itself. Oh, well, look what happened there. Oh, look, I made the wrong decision here. And that's another wrong decision. And this wouldn't have been better. Because the inner child, as you quite rightly said, Alex, you're spot on, has this perception of perfection. That's what the inner child wants. What's perfection for the inner child? As I've just said, the inner child's idea of perfection is everything the way that it believes it should be, when it believes it should be, how it believes it should be. It's all me, me, me. As I often say, the inner child is me, me, me. Enough about me. Let's talk about me. This is the inner child. Now, that doesn't mean to say it's evil or nasty or horrible or against you. That's why I prefer the label of the inner child. It's like a 6-year-old child just wanting everything it wants when it wants it. And then when it goes wrong, guess who it blames? It blames you. Because he said, well, you should have been in more control. You should have been able to guide me. You should have been able to tell me stop. But if you tell it stop, then the inner child connects to your emotions.
So I guess here, David, we're tapping into our ego or inner child's beliefs that we should be perfect, life should be perfect, we should be able to control and know all outcomes, and that everyone should do what we want and respect what we want and act favorably towards us. So even at our ripe old age, whatever age you are at when you're listening to this, if you are experiencing this, I guess there's some measure of you still not accepting the reality that you can only control so many things. Well, nobody's perfect, you and nobody else. And life often does not go in the way we expect or want.
Well, I would say life never goes in the way that we expect or want, because we live in the unknown. And as you was listing that out, doesn't that sound ridiculous? When you say it out loud, when you sit down, and this is what I'm always saying, when you're having that conversation with your inner child, we call it reparenting. And we've done many teachings in the archives. Please look at them. This is the mature part of you, the part of you that's watching me now and criticizing or agreeing or disagreeing and thinking about it and logically going through it. That's the mature part of you, and that's what we want to engage. Alex has just described what we call the inner child. The inner child is on a totally different agenda. It wants perfection. The inner child wants to be future-proofed. It wants to know what's going to happen. It wants to know how it's going to react when it happens. It wants to be in control. But the problem with the inner child and what Alex has just said, there's a fundamental flaw. The inner child is always trying to control external people, events, stimuli. It's trying to second guess. It wants to know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And what we've got to try and teach it is to control itself, to accept that we live in the unknown, to accept that you can't be perfect. Perfection is a perception. It doesn't exist. Wouldn't it be better to be the best that you can be and live in your flow? But the inner child will resist that because it will say, well, look at them. They've got a bigger car than me, or they're earning more money than me, or their children are happier than my children. The inner child will always be on that kind of a journey. And that's what you've got to be aware of. Because if you're not aware of it, you become the victim of it.
Yeah.
The inner child's in control. Because how the inner child controls you? By your emotions. And that's why when we teach the golden thread, the inner child will create emotions, fear, scared, anxiety, depression, whatever, jealousy, whatever. It creates those emotions to get its own way.
So if the inner child's perception of what our life journey should have been is one of almost like a straight line of progressive growth, no missteps, no mistakes, achievements, always doing the right thing, always kind of having the right outcomes, like a straight line, like almost climbing up a mountain in a straight line. The other part of us that we talk about in many of our teachings, the Shen, our authentic self, our spiritual self, our wise inner self. This has a different perception of what our life journey should be. But and this now taps into, I guess, the Taoist teachings of what our life journey should be.
Yes.
So
the Shen would see that as totally different. For instance, talking about this straight line projection, which is exactly how the inner child sees it. You're absolutely right. And it sees a straight line projection as it has to be number one. It has to be, he has to be, she has to be the best at all times, better than everyone else. The Shen part of us, our spiritual part of us, that inner knowing, as you say, that inner wisdom, understands and accepts fully that life is Wu Wei, in the flow. And we only learn by making mistakes. Let me repeat that. Every human being only learns by making mistakes. It's something as simple as driving your car. You didn't jump in your car and drive it perfectly. On day one, you crunched the gears, forgot to indicate, run up the curb. You learn as you go along until now you jump in the car, you don't even think about it. You listen to the radio, you talk to your passengers, you drive the car. And so this is the learning process. Now, the Shen part of you, the spiritual part of you, what I would call the authentic part of you, your inner wisdom, knows this journey and is happy to learn from the mistakes. Where the inner child not happy to learn from the mistakes because it doesn't think it should have a mistake. And there's the inner conflict, if you want to use a word. The inner child now enters that conflict and its secret weapon, its atomic bomb, emotions. It now produces emotions. And that emotions now become, my clients will use words like overpowering, overbearing. It's ingrained. I can't change it. I'm the victim. Poor me. And then it will start to use the victim statements. And the inner child gets its own way. It can't win. Then it blames you.
So, I mean, I really, for myself personally, I like to think of we're here to have a human experience in all its shapes and forms, and that the journey is not a straight path. There are often pauses, there are often deviations, there are often loops back, retracing steps and looping back and moving forwards again. And for me, I kind of accept that. I'm here to have a human experience, and the human experience will not always be a straight line. It won't always be pleasurable, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow. And with that acceptance of that comes a sense of inner peace for me.
Yes, and the word is exactly right. The Taoist word to understand this is acceptance. Acceptance, for me, being a Taoist monk, is an extremely powerful and life-changing word. So to accept doesn't mean to say it's okay and it's right. To accept means we accept it happens, and how do we move on from that? And the way that you just explained it sounds perfectly logical and correct from your mature point, Alex's point. I don't know about little Alex, but little Alex would be saying something like, yes, but that's not fair. What happened to me is unjust. This shouldn't have happened to me. The way my parent treated me, the way the school treated me, the way that somebody bullied me, that's not right. That's not fair. And the inner child will hang on to that injustice, unfairness, and use it, for those of you who play cards, like a trump card. It trumps you. It says, yes, but how about that unfairness? You agree with me, that wasn't fair, was it? The way my mummy treated me, my daddy treated me, my brothers treated me, the way school treated me, they treated me unfairly. I'm not going to just let go of that, because then now, this is another thing I hear a lot from my clients. David, if I accept that and let go of that, they get away with it. And this is typical of the inner child's way of thinking.
And David, do you think that as we get that sense of inner resistance, when the inner child throws up counter arguments for accepting the non-straight line approach to life and our life trajectory, do you think that it's helpful? I'm asking this because in a way, this is what I've done and it's what worked for me. Do you think it's helpful that as the inner child throws up a counter argument or a resistance or a kind of digs its heels in, is to almost, and it will present an example or an issue that it's holding on to, is to, in effect, give yourself a talk to your inner child calmly and say, actually, you're perceiving this injustice or this mistake or this missed opportunity wrongly, and talk to your inner child as a wiser, calmer, more mature adult. And then after a time, it's like the resistance goes. And I guess also I found it helpful to acknowledge that the disbenefit, the downside of holding on to or allowing my ego or my inner child to hold on to the counter argument or its position, because I can also strongly perceive there's no benefit and it will just cause me more red light feelings, more heartache. And so actually it's much better to look at it more clearly and rationally and let that one thing go. And then if you do that every time, it's like you're dismantling a series of arguments or beliefs that the inner child's holding on to.
Right, well, you said a lot there, Alex. So let me try and go through that. So if you can have that conversation that you just explained with your inner child, you're already on a great path. So the first level you have to get through is the emotional feelings. Now, a lot of my clients can't get past the emotional feelings, fearful, scared, anxious, whatever you want to call it. We call it a red light feeling. Many of them can't get past that. And that's where we've done, again, many teachings on how to get past that with a golden thread. Once you can get to where you're at, being able to have that conversation with the inner child, you've already done another step. Because what a lot of people do is they get past the emotion and then they get to hear for the first time what the inner child is saying. And if, for want of a better word, the argument the inner child is presenting. Oh, that was unfair. Look how bad my mum, dad, brother, sister, auntie, or uncle were, and they shouldn't have done that. Then what they do, they don't address the argument. They try and shut the inner child down. They try and block it away. They ignore it. They look in the other way. And so the inner child then goes back to the emotion. Now, the first level is the emotion. Second level is to open the conversation. Now you're at the third level, which sounds great. Now you can engage in the conversation. And this is why I love the terminology of the inner child. I want you to imagine that you are the spiritual parent and your inner child is coming to you and saying, I want to talk about what happened to me when I was 6 or 7. I want to explain to you that this is really unfair. This was unjust. This shouldn't have happened. My life would have been better if it hadn't have happened. Now, as you said, now you can engage in that discussion. This is what I call reparenting. And to get you to this stage is what I would like you to think we call the Shen test. Imagine your physical son or daughter came to you and said, Mommy, Daddy, I'm being bullied at school. You wouldn't say to him, oh, you'll sort it out, forget about it, don't worry about it, you get over these, is one of these You would talk to your child. You would get more information. You would ask your child, how can we work on this together? And there's the key to solving the problem with your inner child. Is the inner child and the mature you have to be a team working on it together. So the inner child will give you dilemmas and very difficult for you to solve. It will give you, for instances, it will say, it's not fair. It's unjust. My life would have been better if I'd had a great dad who bounced me on his knee and loved me. I had a dad who was never at home, who was a drunk, who left when I was 6 years old, who abandoned me. Now you've got to address those really deep issues. And to be honest, when I work with my clients, we have to get through that higher stuff because we have to deal with those deeper issues. And that is the, as you say, the deconstruction or the re-education. And that is the way that you cure the, isn't it fair? Shouldn't it have been better? The comparing, the criticizing, the being judgmental. And that really is where the skill of the inner child work comes in. When I'm working with my clients, I'm trying to get to that level as quick as I can. It's very difficult, Alex, because the emotional level is very powerful. Yeah. And a lot of my clients have been living all their life in the emotional level. Yeah. So they're very quick to go, well, I feel this, I feel that, I feel this. Oh, I'm really upset now. And they can't get deeper. And then when you get them deeper, you see them start crying and go, well, I don't know the answer to this. I don't know how to answer this. I agree with the inner child. It was unfair. It shouldn't have happened. Then you have to get to the level of that re-education, that emotional re-education. Because if you don't get past that level, the inner child is stuck in the loop. And all it knows how to do to get your attention, to get some help, is to create red light feelings. That's why I see the red light feelings. It's your inner child frozen in the corner of a cellar, in a dark cellar, stuck. And the only way it knows how to get attention and help is to create red light feelings. And when you go to help it in the first instance, it won't trust you. It will believe you're going to let it down. It's not going to work because the inner child now has built this wall of protection of negativity.
And this is why when we do this inner child work, we need to be consistent about it.
Consistency is so important, Alex. That's a great word I didn't bring into that teaching. Consistency is the number one thing. It is okay to say to the inner child, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that, but we'll find it.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate this is a massive topic. And, for some people, they are ruminating on very, very significant traumas from their past. And we've done several teachings on letting go of past trauma and that sort of thing, as well as a whole catalogue of teachings on inner child work and inner child reparenting that will help you with this topic. And I will put links to those show notes. But as you can see, this letting go of the past, this rumination is very, very much based on understanding and working with your inner child. We really hope that you have benefited from this teaching, please do let us know and perhaps share it with someone else who you think it may also help. David works every week with clients all over the world by Zoom video call on exactly these sort of issues about past traumas and inner child work. If you'd like to learn more about David's one-to-one sessions, please do also check out the show notes where I will put a link to those as well. And finally, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We produce new teachings every week and we would love to share your journey with you. Bye-bye.